She sat in a chair she did not belong in, a lawyer's office, a Tuesday morning, the kind of Tuesday that looks exactly like every other Tuesday, until it doesn't. Around the table, the family, the son who had never once remembered her name, not in 12 years, not once. She had introduced herself to him 4 separate times over the years. Each time he had nodded. Each time he had forgotten by the next visit. The daughter who spoke to her the way people speak to furniture. Politely, efficiently, without ever really seeing her. The nephew who came every Christmas and looked through her like she was made of glass, 2 days every December, and not once, in 12 years, had he asked her a single question about herself. They were all here for the reading of Edward Calloway's will. Margaret was here because the lawyer had called her specifically. She had almost said no. She was the cleaner. She had cleaned Edward's house every Tuesday and Friday for 12 years. She was not family. She was not a friend in any formal sense of the word. She did not understand why she was sitting at this table. The room smelled of old paper and central heating. A clock ticked somewhere she could not see. The lawyer opened the document. He adjusted his glasses. He began reading. The family leaned forward. Richard, the son, with his arms crossed. Caroline, the daughter, with a pen already in her hand. Marcus, the nephew, with his phone face down on the table like a concession. And then, without warning, without anything in the room to prepare her, the lawyer reached a paragraph that made every single person at that table go completely silent. Margaret's name. In the will of a man worth $4 million. Her name. Before I tell you what Edward wrote, I want to ask you something, and I want you to sit with it for a moment before you answer. Think about the people who move through your life quietly, not the ones who announce themselves, not the ones who ask for recognition, the ones who simply show up, the ones who notice things without being told, the ones who do small, significant things and never mention them, the ones the world overlooks, but who are holding more together than anyone around them realizes. Do you have someone like that in your life? A person whose consistency you have come to expect so completely that you have forgotten to see it? Drop their name in the comments below. Just one word is enough. Mom, Dad, her, him, a name. Because this story is about what happens when someone who has been invisible for a very long time finally gets seen. And I think more of us know someone who deserves that than we admit. Now let me tell you about Margaret, and about the man whose house she cleaned for 12 years, and about everything that happened in between. Margaret Ellis was 61 years old. She had been a cleaner for 35 years, not because she had dreamed of it as a young woman, not because it was the life she had mapped out for herself at 22, when everything still felt possible, because life had directed her there, and she was practical enough to follow. She was born the third of 4 children in a small house in the north of England. Her parents were not poor exactly, but there was never excess. You learned early in that house that things had value, that effort had dignity, that you did not wait for someone else to do what needed doing. She left school at 16, worked in a shop, married at 24. A man called Thomas, who was quiet and dependable, and who loved her in the steady, unhurried way that does not make good stories but makes good lives. They had a house, 2 children who arrived close together, a life that was modest and sufficient and, she would say later, genuinely happy. And then Thomas died, on a Thursday morning in March, a heart attack. No warning, no conversation that turned out to be a goodbye, no chance to prepare. He left for work, and he did not come back. Margaret was 42 years old. Her children were 15 and 17. The mortgage had 11 years left on it. The bills did not pause for grief. She sat in her kitchen the week after the funeral, with the paperwork spread in front of her, and she looked at the numbers, and she understood what the numbers were telling her, and she did what she had always done when life presented her with something hard. She got on with it. She registered with a cleaning agency the following Monday. She had never cleaned professionally before, but she was thorough and reliable, and she showed up when she said she would. which, she discovered, was rarer than it should have been. Within 3 months, she had more work than she could comfortably manage. Within a year, she had left the agency and built her own small list of private clients. Houses, mostly. A few offices. One school on Friday afternoons. She was reliable. Thorough. Quiet. She left things better than she found them. That was her standard. For everything. Not just the houses. For everything. She did not make friends with the people whose homes she cleaned. That was a line she had drawn early. Professional distance. It was safer that way. You learn things about people when you clean their homes. The true shape of their lives revealed itself in the things they left out. The things they left on counters and floors and bedside tables. The gaps between the life they presented to the world and the life they actually lived. She kept those things to herself, and she kept herself to herself. 35 years, dozens of clients, professional, reliable, present, and then she took on Edward Calloway. He was referred to her by another client. He is a retired professor, they said. Lives alone in that large house on Hartley Road. Very private, very particular about how things are done. The last cleaner left after 3 months. Margaret had asked why. He has a list, they said. A very specific list. She had nodded. She was familiar with particular. Particular she could work with. She expected difficult when she arrived that first Tuesday morning. A large Victorian house on a quiet road. Well maintained from the outside. The garden slightly overgrown but not neglected. The kind of house that suggested someone who had once had more energy for it. He opened the door precisely at 9. Edward Calloway was 70 at the time. Tall, slightly stooped, white hair that was still thick, eyes that were precise in the way that some academic eyes are, like they were accustomed to reading things carefully before forming an opinion. He looked at her. She looked at him. He said, "You are Margaret." She said, "I am." He said, "Come in." And that was the beginning of 12 years. The house was always reasonably tidy when she arrived. Not clean exactly, not the way she would clean it, but not the chaos she had encountered in other homes. He had a system. He had a specific order in which he liked things done. Specific products for specific surfaces. Specific cloths for specific tasks. And on the kitchen table every Tuesday and Friday, a handwritten list. Neat. Precise. Numbered. She read the first one carefully. It was thorough. She followed it without question. He was polite, not warm exactly, but never cold. There was a formality to him that she recognized from certain other clients of a certain generation. People who had been taught that politeness was a form of respect, and who maintained it rigorously because they believed that. They established a rhythm in the first weeks. She arrived at 9. He made 2 cups of tea, one for him, one for her. He never asked if she wanted one. He simply made it, and she always drank it. They exchanged perhaps 10 minutes of conversation over those cups. The weather, something in the local news. Small, careful things that established presence without demanding intimacy. And then she worked, and he retreated to his study, and they existed in parallel. 2 people sharing a space in the most professional and unremarkable way imaginable. That was the arrangement. That was what it was supposed to be. For 12 years. The first thing Margaret noticed was the photographs. Edward had no photographs of family on display anywhere in the house. Not one. No wedding pictures on the wall. No children's school portraits on the sideboard. No grandchildren's drawings on the refrigerator. No images of holidays or celebrations, or the accumulated evidence of a life lived alongside other people. Just books. Art that he had clearly chosen carefully over many years. And one small framed photograph on his desk that she never looked at directly, because it felt private. She met the family occasionally over 12 years. Not often, but enough to form impressions. The son Richard called sometimes while she was working. She could hear Edward's side of the conversations from the next room. Short, functional. The calls of 2 people who have reduced their relationship to maintenance. Yes, fine. I'll let you know. Edward never mentioned Richard after those calls. Not once. He would return to whatever he had been doing before, as if the call had not happened, as if the interruption had not cost him anything. But she noticed that he was always slightly quieter for the hour after. The daughter Caroline visited twice in 12 years. Margaret was there for both visits. The first time Caroline arrived, she walked through the house looking at things, not affectionately, assessingly. The way you look at something you are calculating the value of. She spoke to Margaret briefly, pleasantly, in the tone of someone who has been taught that you should be pleasant to service people without ever being required to actually see them. The second visit was similar. 3 years later, slightly shorter. The nephew Marcus came every Christmas, stayed 2 days, ate Edward's food, watched Edward's television, occasionally carried his plate to the sink, which Margaret noticed Edward registering. The way you register when someone does something you had stopped expecting. Marcus left without helping with anything else, without asking Edward anything about his life, without seeming to notice that the man sitting across from him at Christmas dinner was, if you paid any attention at all, becoming more alone every year. She noticed that after each family visit, Edward was quieter than usual, not sad in a visible way, not complaining, just reduced, like something had been taken from him that he had not offered willingly, like visiting your own family should not cost you something, and yet somehow it always did. She never commented on it. That was not her place. But she noticed. She always noticed. Margaret had been cleaning houses for 35 years. She understood that houses tell you things. If you pay attention. She paid attention. Edward's house told her he was one of the most curious people she had ever encountered. The books alone, floor to ceiling in his study, spilling onto side tables in the sitting room, stacked carefully on the floor beside his chair. Philosophy, history, science, mathematics, poetry, not for show. These were working books, annotated, marked, worn with use, the kind of books that have been read properly rather than displayed. His notebooks told her he was still writing at 81, still thinking, still reaching towards something. She had asked him once, carefully, without intruding, what he was working on. He had looked up from his desk. Most people in her experience either dismissed the question or gave a brief answer designed to close the conversation. Edward had answered it, properly, for 12 minutes. About a book he had been writing for 6 years on the philosophy of time, about the difference between time as a measurement and time as an experience, about how the older he got, the more convinced he became that the two had almost nothing to do with each other. She had listened, properly, and asked a question that came from genuine curiosity rather than politeness. He had looked at her, she remembered this clearly, with a kind of surprise, not condescension, something closer to pleasure, like someone who had been talking to himself for a very long time, and had unexpectedly found someone listening. After that, the 10 minutes of morning tea conversation changed. Not dramatically, but the smallness of the subjects gave way gradually to larger ones. He asked what she thought about things. She told him. He disagreed sometimes. Precisely. Without malice. She disagreed back. It became, over years, something she looked forward to. Something she suspected he looked forward to also, though neither of them ever said so. The refrigerator told her he was not eating properly. Half-eaten things. Things left too long. A pattern of someone who cooked when they had energy, and didn't bother when they didn't. She started leaving things. The first time she left a container of soup she had made at home, she put it at the back of the second shelf, said nothing. On Friday it was gone. She left another one the following Tuesday. Gone by Friday. She started baking on Sundays with him in mind. A piece of cake, a small loaf. Something that would keep. She left them without mentioning them. He received them without mentioning them. But she noticed, over months and then years, that the refrigerator was slightly fuller on the days she arrived, like someone had started trying a little harder, because someone was noticing. The second thing she noticed was the decline. It was gradual, the kind that only reveals itself clearly to someone who is present consistently over years, who sees the same person twice a week, and can measure the distance between who they were and who they are becoming. The handwriting on his Tuesday lists became less precise, slightly, then more so. The letters that had been neat and regular for years began to vary, inconsistencies that were invisible to anyone looking at one list in isolation, but visible as a pattern to someone who had read them twice a week for a decade. He moved more carefully through the house, the careful movement of someone who has learned that the floor is less reliable than it used to be, who has learned to use furniture edges and door frames in ways they never had to before. The tea took a little longer to make each month. She pretended not to notice. He pretended it was not happening. They were both very good at that particular pretense. One Friday she arrived and found him in his chair, unable to get up without assistance. He had been there since the previous afternoon. He was not panicked. He was precise. Even in that, he explained what had happened in the same tone he used to describe items on his cleaning list. She helped him to his feet without making it significant. She made tea. He thanked her, without making it significant. They drank their tea. She did her work. She left at the usual time. But from that Friday onward, she quietly added things to her visits that were not on the list. She checked the refrigerator every time. Not obviously. Just checking. She made sure the bath mat was not a hazard, that the rugs were flat at the edges, that the things he reached for regularly were where he could reach them without stretching. Small adjustments, invisible ones, the kind that require no conversation and draw no attention to the need that prompted them. And before she left, every single time, she called out to him from the hallway. Just a few words. I'm heading off now. See you Tuesday, or Friday, or whichever day it was. She needed to hear his voice answer. She never explained why. He never asked. He always answered. One Tuesday morning in February, she arrived at 9 o'clock. She knocked. No answer. She knocked again. The door was unlocked. She opened it carefully, called his name, and found him on the kitchen floor. He had fallen the previous evening, sometime around 7. He had been there since. He was conscious, lucid, in pain but managing it with the same precision he managed everything. He told her not to call anyone. His voice was steady. I'm perfectly fine. I just need a moment to get up. She looked at him, lying on the kitchen floor, 12 hours after falling. In February, she called an ambulance. He protested with considerable precision while she made the call. She let him protest. She kept talking to the dispatcher. The paramedics arrived. She made sure to give them his medication list, which she had memorized without intending to, because she had seen it on his bedside table every Friday for 4 years, and her mind had simply retained it. He was admitted. He was discharged 3 days later. She was there when the taxi brought him home. She had used her own key, which he had given her years ago for emergencies, to let herself in the previous day. She had cleaned the house thoroughly, stocked the refrigerator with things she had bought herself, left soup on the stove, made the bed with fresh sheets, opened the curtains in his study so the afternoon light would be there when he arrived, put his current notebook on the desk beside his pen. He came in slowly, used the wall more than usual, sat in his chair. He looked around the room. He was quiet for a long moment, and then he said, I don't know how to thank you for this. She said, the list was short this week. I had time. He looked at her. She looked at him. Something passed between them that neither of them named. They never discussed it again. The last 2 years were different. Not dramatically, but in the way that the quality of time changes when both people in a room understand that it is finite. He was slower, more careful. He stopped going out alone. The Tuesday and Friday lists became shorter, not because the house needed less doing, but because his world had contracted. The study was still full of books. The notebooks were still being written in. The morning tea was still made, but he stayed closer to his chair, closer to the window, closer to the things he could reach without effort. Their conversations in those 2 years were different too. Less about current things, more about past ones. He told her about his wife, Eleanor, who had died 17 years before Margaret had ever walked through his door. He told her about Eleanor's laugh, about the way she argued about things she cared about the house they had lived in before this one, about the year they had spent in Florence when he was on sabbatical, the year he described as the only year of his life that had felt genuinely outside of time. He told her about his children when they were young, before whatever had happened between them had happened. He never explained what that was. She never asked, but she understood from the way he spoke about those early years, with a warmth that was absent from anything he said about them now, that something had been lost that he had never recovered, and had perhaps never fully understood how to grieve. She listened, the way she had always listened, properly, without performing attention, without waiting for her turn to speak, just present, in the way she had been present twice a week for 12 years. The last time she saw him conscious was a Friday in September. He was in his chair. He looked tired in a way that was different from the other tiredness she had seen in him. She made the tea. She brought it to him. She sat across from him for longer than usual. They talked about the book he was writing, about whether he would finish it. He said, "I think I've said most of what I needed to say. The rest is just arrangement," she said. "Then it's nearly done." He said, "Yes, nearly." She left at the usual time. She said, "See you Tuesday." He said, "Yes." On the Monday the neighbor called. Edward died on a Sunday in October, in his chair, by the window, which was, she thought when she heard, exactly right. She sat in her own kitchen for a long time after the neighbor's call. She had known it was coming. She had watched it approach for 2 years. She had not been prepared for it anyway. Grief does not negotiate with preparation. It arrives in its own time, in its own shape. The grief surprised her. Its specificity surprised her. She had told herself for 12 years that this was professional, a job, a routine, 2 days a week, a list on a kitchen table. She sat in her kitchen and understood, for the first time with complete clarity, that it had not been any of those things, not for a long time, perhaps not ever. She grieved for him the way you grieve for someone who mattered, without apology, without qualification. The lawyer called the following Thursday. He gave his name. He said he was handling the estate of Edward Calloway. He said Margaret's name had been mentioned in the will. He asked if she would attend the reading. She was quiet for a moment. She said, "I was his cleaner." The lawyer said, "Yes, he mentioned that. He asked that you come." She almost said no. She was the cleaner. She did not belong at a will reading. She had no claim on anything. She did not understand why she was being asked. But something made her go. She put on her good coat. She took the bus to the address he had given her. She sat down in a chair she did not belong in, and she waited. The lawyer began at 10 o'clock precisely. Standard provisions first. The house, the accounts, the investment portfolio. $4 million divided between the 3 family members, in proportions that were specific and unequal. And that caused immediate visible tension around the table. Richard's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Caroline pressed her pen against her notepad. Marcus shifted in his seat. The lawyer continued reading, and then he stopped. He turned a page. He adjusted his glasses. He cleared his throat. "There is a separate section," he said. "A personal bequest. Mr. Calloway asked that I read this in full." The room was very still. The lawyer began. "To Margaret Ellis." Richard looked up. "Who came to my house every Tuesday and Friday for 12 years. Caroline turned her head slowly toward Margaret. "And who in that time became, without either of us intending it, the most consistent and reliable human presence in my life." Nobody moved. The clock ticked somewhere. The lawyer continued. "I have thought carefully about how to describe what Margaret gave me. Words like kindness and loyalty seem insufficient. Words like friendship seem presumptuous given the professional nature of our arrangement. But I have settled on this. Margaret saw me, not the professor, not the retired man in the large house, not the difficult client with the particular list. Me. She noticed when I wasn't eating. She noticed when I had fallen. She noticed when the family had visited and left me diminished. She noticed what I was working on and asked about it as if the answer genuinely mattered to her. It did matter to her. I know because she remembered. Week after week, year after year. She remembered. She never made any of this significant. She never presented her care as something I should feel indebted for. She simply, quietly, showed up, twice a week, for 12 years. And in the showing up, she gave me something I had stopped expecting to receive. Presence. Real, unhurried, consistent. The kind of presence that does not require anything from you, that simply exists alongside you and makes the room feel less empty. The lawyer paused. The room was completely silent. He continued, I am leaving Margaret the contents of my study, the books, the notebooks, everything I have written, because she is the only person in 12 years who ever asked what I was working on and waited for the actual answer. And I am leaving her the sum of $250,000. Silence. Not as payment, as acknowledgement. Because some people move through the world doing quietly significant things that nobody names. Margaret is one of those people. This is me, naming it. I hope she reads the notebooks. I think she will understand them. The lawyer placed the document on the table. Richard spoke first. His voice was controlled. Careful. Can this be contested? Caroline had her pen ready. On what grounds? Marcus said nothing. His expression said everything. Margaret sat very still. She was not thinking about the money. She was not thinking about the books. She was thinking about a Tuesday morning 12 years ago. 2 cups of tea on a kitchen table. A precise handwritten list. A man she had decided, without ceremony, without expectation, without any thought of what it might one day become, to treat with the same care she gave every surface in his house. Because that was simply who she was. Because that was simply how she did things. The family did contest it. Of course they did. Richard hired a lawyer within the week. Caroline joined him. Marcus, after some consideration, did not. The contest failed. Edward had been thorough. He had been assessed for capacity 6 months before his death. He had left a letter with his lawyer explaining his reasoning in precise and unambiguous terms. He had been, as in everything, precise. The contest cost the family money and time and a great deal of the goodwill that remained between them. It cost Margaret 18 months of uncertainty, of not knowing, of sitting with something she hadn't asked for and didn't feel she deserved, while other people argued about whether she should have it. She did not speak publicly about any of it. She did not give interviews. She did not respond to the 2 local journalists who called her. She went back to work. She cleaned houses. She showed up when she said she would. She left things better than she found them. That was her standard. For everything. When the legal process concluded and the bequest was confirmed, she sat in her kitchen with the papers in front of her. She thought about Thomas, about the Thursday morning, about the numbers on the table after the funeral, about the Monday she had walked into the agency and registered. She thought about 35 years of Tuesdays and Fridays, of precise lists and particular clients and professional distance, of the line she had drawn early, and how, with one specific man on one quiet road, it had blurred, not because she had tried to blur it, but because that was what happened when 2 people existed alongside each other honestly for long enough. The distance became something else, something that didn't have a clean name. But that was real, and that mattered. She kept Edward's notebooks on the shelf in her sitting room. She read them slowly, a few pages at a time. The way you read something you want to last. She understood most of it, more than she had expected. She thought he would have been pleased by that. She thought he probably knew she would. Margaret did not set out to change Edward's life. She set out to clean his house. The rest happened because of who she was, not what she was trying to do. She left soup on the stove because a man was not eating. She called the ambulance because he needed one. She came back when he was discharged because leaving him alone was simply not something she was capable of. She asked about his writing because she was genuinely curious. She listened because she respected him. She remembered because the things he said were worth remembering. Every small act was simply Margaret being Margaret. In a world that had largely decided Edward Calloway was finished, an old man, retired, living alone in a house too big for one person, she simply kept showing up, twice a week, for 12 years. And in the showing up, she gave him the one thing that his family, despite having far more obligation and far more history, had stopped giving: presence, real, unhurried, consistent, the kind that does not require you to perform being fine, the kind that simply exists alongside you. The lesson here is not that kindness gets rewarded. Sometimes it does not. Edward's money was not the point. The money was simply the language Edward chose, because he was a man who had run out of time for other languages. The point is something simpler and more important. The way you treat people, all people, the ones the world considers significant, and the ones the world has decided to look through, reveals everything about who you are, not in grand moments, in small ones, in the soup you leave in a refrigerator without mentioning it, in the name you remember, in the question you ask and wait for the actual answer to, in the Tuesday and Friday mornings you show up, not because anyone is watching, but because showing up is simply what you do. Edward saw all of it. For 12 years he saw it, and when the time came, he named it, in the most permanent way he knew how. There is someone in your life right now who is showing up quietly, who is noticing the things you don't announce, who is doing small, significant things and never mentioning them, a parent who checks in every week without being asked, a friend who remembers the things you mentioned once, a neighbor who notices when something is different, someone whose consistency you have come to expect so completely that you have forgotten to see it. See it today. You do not need a will. You do not need a lawyer's office or a formal document or a room full of people. You have something Edward did not have enough of at the end. Time. Use it. Pick up the phone. Send the message. Knock on the door. And say the thing that needs to be said. Not later. Not when the moment feels right. Now. Because the people who show up quietly for us are not doing it because they expect to be named. They are doing it because that is simply who they are. But that does not mean they don't deserve to hear it. It means they deserve to hear it more. If this story reached something in you today, share it with someone who shows up quietly in your life. Let them know, in whatever words you have, that you see them, that you have always seen them, that they were never as invisible as the world made them feel. Subscribe to The Untold Cost for a new story every week. Stories about the people who never asked to be noticed, and who deserve to be seen all along. I will see you in the next one.